Hello, I'm Jamila Musayeva, an international social etiquette consultant and author of etiquette books, Etiquette, the Least You Need to Know, and Afternoon Tea Etiquette. If you would like to purchase my books, please make sure you email me at info@jamilamusayeva.com. I'll link it down below here, and you'll get full information about how to order my books. If you're a new patron on my channel, welcome. I am extremely happy to see you here. Before I start this video, I want to explain the format. We will be watching the movie that I have chosen, and we'll be taking a look at specific certain episodes from the movie and looking at what kind of etiquette and general life lessons we can learn from it. And if you are a returning patron, you already know the format, and I'm extremely grateful for your continuous support. So without further ado, let's get started with analyzing my ultimate favorite movie and novel, The Great Gatsby, the one that has inspired generations of people in preparing for a party or a dress code like Great Gatsby. It's a very iconic movie and has left a huge mark in fashion, style, and general lifestyle. So let's take a look at specific lessons and discover what can be learned. In this very first episode, Daisy is having dinner with her family and friends, and we get an airplane view of the table setup. Let's take a look at it and discuss.
Would you like to hear a family secret?
That's why I came over.
It's about the butler's nose.
Things went from bad to worse.
I hate that word, Hulk.
Nikki, I heard a rumor that you were getting married to a girl out west.
It's a libel. I'm too poor.
They have to be old so they die quickly.
Can't we talk about something else?
We had a
Anything.
plan.
Crops. You're making me feel uncivilized, Daisy.
Civilization going to pieces.
So we all know that the most formal dinner table setup includes a white tablecloth, which is what we see at the table. Then we get this airplane view of the table setup. We see that there's a little bread plate that's placed on the left-hand side next to the main plate, and then there's a butter knife that's placed vertically on that plate. We then see the dish, and to both sides with a set of 2 forks. And interestingly, on the right-hand side, we first see the knife, which is further away from the plate, and then closer to the plate we see a spoon. So by looking at the setup, we could assume that the first meal is something that could be cut with a knife, and then the second meal is something that could be eaten with a spoon, because the spoon is the one that's closer to the dish. So the second course, the final course, will be the one that will be served with spoon and a fork. And we see the beautiful crystal wine glasses. We see this very beautiful chandeliers with candles on them that are lit up. Because this is evening time, we know it looking at the window, there's a view of the window, and we see that it's dark outside, it's dinner time. That's why it's permissible to light up the candles. You'll later see another episode where the chandeliers with candles are there, but they are not lit up because it's daytime outside. We'll move on to that episode a little bit later. Next, we get to see an invitation to a party. Take a look particularly at the invitation itself and what's written there.
I got an invitation. I was the only one. By which I mean no one except me ever received an actual invitation to Gatsby's.
This is a handwritten invitation that's sent by Mr. Gatsby himself to Nick Carraway. Interestingly, he's the only one, as he says, to receive this kind of invitation, because the rest of the people just assume and come to the party without having a proper invitation. We know that this is a very official formal invitation because it's delivered to his door. It is written on a specific stationer that contains Gatsby's initials, and it's handwritten. When a note like that is handwritten on an official stationer, it means the person is deemed to be very important for the host that's inviting. It says, "Dear Miss Carraway, would be pleased to see you. Sincerely, Gatsby." Interestingly, there is no mentioning of the time, there is no mentioning of the venue or the dress code. I think it's because Gatsby assumes that everyone knows about his party, where it is and at what time it starts, and the people are free to choose whatever they want to wear. We're going to see the next episode where we see that indeed there is no specific dress code.
I mean everyone, from every walk of life, from every corner of New York City. This kaleidoscopic carnival spilled through Gatsby's door.
My invitation. Oh, just my throat. You don't need to know the guy. I know it.
caravansary of billionaire playboy publishers and their blonde nurses. Heiresses comparing inheritances on Gatsby's beach. My boss, Walter Chase, losing money at the roulette tables.
So we see this episode where a crowd of people are arriving. Everyone is dressed differently. Somehow women have a certain style that's going on with their long gowns, really deep v-necks, open backs, and some kind of accessory on their hair, a lot of feather. But for men, we see that some are wearing bow ties that are black, others are wearing white bow ties. There's an episode where you see elder men playing roulette, and you see that they have a white bow tie and white vest, whereas a lot of others are wearing black bow ties. So then we see other men that are wearing jacket and pants, suit pants that are of a completely different set with ties. So based on what men are wearing, we can say that there's no one particular dress code. Some are wearing according to white tie, others to black tie, and others just completely according to cocktail attire. Whereas when we look at women, there's this distinctive style of that particular era. It's interesting how this movie and this general style has now its own way of decoding, or its own dress code, which is called the Great Gatsby style. Oftentimes you see people throwing in parties today where the dress code indicates Great Gatsby, and we know what reference is used, and that is this particular movie and the novel and the way the women in particular, were dressed. The next episode shows the Great Gatsby secret smile. Take a look at the smile and be attentive when you're looking at the way he is smiling. And we'll talk about the importance of body language in general, and in particular certain tricks about giving a very genuine smile.
The devil. I'm afraid I haven't been a very good host, old sport. You see, I'm Gatsby.
His smile was one of those rare smiles that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It seemed to understand you and believe in you, just as you would like to be understood and believed in.
So I just want to bring your attention to the way Nick Carraway describes Great Gatsby's smile. He says that it's the one that is believed in who you are. The way that he smiles at you, he makes you feel like he believes in you and who you are and what you stand for. I think the most important thing when I was looking at this episode is understanding it from a body language perspective. So you see in this episode that when Gatsby arrives, he doesn't smile immediately. He doesn't have this ready-to-wear smile on his face that's just there on his face and he's granting it to every single guest. No, you don't see that. You see that he first meets Nick. He doesn't immediately have a smile on his face. He says something, and only after a little bit of time, he grants him a very genuine smile. This is a very powerful technique. If you want to enchant someone with your smile, you don't just immediately have a smiley face before meeting them. You delay your smile and grant them to the person that you want to appreciate the smile. So this is what Gatsby has done. He has smitten away Nick by delaying the smile, not having it immediately on his face, taking the time to smile directly to Nick. And based on the way that he smiles, we see that he has wrinkles around his lips, and he has very particular Leonardo DiCaprio wrinkles and foxy eyes around his eye area. So his eyes become smaller. You see lines around his eyes that shows that it's a genuine smile. And the third powerful element in that smile is the fact that he's gazing right directly at Nick's eyes. He's looking at them while doing the smile and raising the toast. So it makes Nick feel special in front of Gatsby's eyes, and he feels that this smile belongs particularly to him, which is, he's right about that. In the next episode, you see a very interesting establishment. It is something that was very popular in the times when alcohol was prohibited in the US. Let's take a look at it and we'll talk.
Ah! My boy!
My.
Smells so good. Look at it.
Look at you, Mr. Carraway. This is my good friend, Mr. Maya Wolfshot.
A wonderful pleasure, Mr. Carraway.
My pleasure.
I know all about you.
I see.
Yes, Mr. Gatsby's always talking about you.
Really? Shall we?
Come. Join us for a little lunch.
Benjamin Franklin's fields, folded just for the thrill.
So in this episode, you see that Gatsby and Nick walk into what it seems like a barber shop. There are men getting their beards trimmed, their hair done, and you see that Gatsby approaches the wall. He knocks on the wall a couple of times. The poster opens. The man checks who these people are, and then he lets them in. They walk in downstairs to this underground bar lounge looking area. There's alcohol being served. There are dancers on the scene, and you see that this is something that is closed. It's almost like a closed club, and not everyone knows that this establishment exists. These are, or were called, speakeasy bars, and they were made popular, or they were emerging during the time of Prohibition era in the United States from 1920s until 1933, which is the time when alcohol was prohibited, so people had to find ways to get alcohol, and they would come to the speakeasy bar, where from the outside it was a different establishment. It could be a salon, it could be a pharmacy, it could be whatever, and then only by knocking certain amount of times or saying something, you would have the door unlocked to the underground establishment where it was closed and alcohol would be served. The reason these establishments were called speakeasy, it meant to speak softly, to mention the name of this establishment softly. So you wouldn't just storm into the barbershop and say, "Where's the bar?" You'd say something like, "Where's number 9?" or some kind of a secret word, and then they would let you in. In this episode, we see a couple of important things: introduction, greetings, and handshake. Let's take a look at it and we'll discuss.
Funny seeing you.
How have you been?
Yeah, good.
Daisy, furious. You haven't called.
Hey, Mr. Gatsby, this is Mr. Buchanan. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
So here we see that Nick has to make an introduction between Mr. Gatsby and Tom Buchanan. Interestingly, Nick first mentions the name of Mr. Gatsby. I think it's because he considers him more important to him. So he first mentions his name, then he states Tom's name, and then Gatsby was seated. He stands up to greet. He stands up to shake hands with Tom. And though when he stands up, he shakes the hand with Tom, interestingly, he doesn't look him in the eye. He gazes downwards. It's interesting because Gatsby is such a confident persona. We see him being so confident in himself. He always looks into people's eyes. He's very particular with his gaze. But in this specific episode, you see that he is not looking into Tom's eyes. And we know why he isn't, but it's interesting as an observer, even if you didn't know what was going on, based on this kind of interaction on the body language, you would know that he's not really pleased to see him. In the next episode, we see how a man assists a woman, or a driver as well assists a woman to get out of the car, and how men should be serving umbrella to a woman.
I can't wait all day. I'm leaving. Don't be silly. It's just 2 minutes to 4.
No one's coming to tea. It's too...
It's her.
Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one?
Yes, it suits me.
Why did I have to come alone? Are you in love with me?
Oh, it's the secret of Caraway Castle. Tell your chauffeur to go far away.
Come back in an hour, 30.
So we see that they're waiting for Daisy to arrive for this afternoon tea. It's 4 p.m., the clock is ticking, and Daisy arrives. It's raining outside, so her cousin Nick runs out with an umbrella because he's not sure if the driver has one, maybe, or he's there to assist her. So he runs out of the door. The driver opens the door and places a mat underneath the door of the car, so when Daisy steps out of it, she doesn't step on the mud, on the grass. So she puts her foot onto the mat, and then Nick is holding the umbrella in his right hand side, on his right hand, and he is serving it from the right hand side. So he lifts the umbrella to the height that's appropriate for the Daisy. When a man is assisting a woman with an umbrella, the woman should be to his right hand side because he's holding the umbrella in his right hand, and also he should adjust the height of the umbrella according to the height of a woman and not himself. In this next episode, we get a glimpse of what looks like a tea ceremony. Now that you've seen a lot of videos where I've discussed afternoon tea ceremony, which is traditional to British, how different it is from the one that Nick is serving Daisy and Gatsby.
We've met before. Have someone come prepare this immediately.
Here we see that Nick is serving them tea in a beautiful tray. He has a teapot, he has a tea strainer and beautiful cups. We see that he places a tea strainer first on the cup and then pours the tea from the teapot. Because this is a tea that's prepared with big tea leaves, he puts a strainer so that in case a leaf falls out of the teapot, it will fall first on the strainer and will not get into the cup. So all of that is very correct, it's very according to the ceremony. But then we see that he fills the cup until almost the top, which is something you wouldn't do if you were serving afternoon tea in Britain. If you were served tea according to the British afternoon tea tradition, you would be asked by the host, how do you like your tea? Do you like it strong or do you like it weak? Either case, you wouldn't fill it until the brim. You would leave a little bit of space in case the guest wants to add some additional hot water or maybe milk, so you wouldn't fill it up like Nick did. And if you remember from my afternoon tea etiquette video, if this would be a traditional British afternoon tea ceremony, you'd have a 3-tiered rack. On the top you'd have sandwiches, on the second you'd have scones, and only on the third you'd have desserts. And you'd have no macaroons or cupcakes. Now, because this is an American novel and this is an American tea ceremony, you see that cupcakes as well as macaroons are being served. In this next episode, we understand how Gatsby became the man that Nick right now knows him.
Seized it.
And I decided right then and there to call myself J. Gatsby.
He sailed the yacht out of danger and into his future. Gatsby showed skill and ambition, and for 5 years they sailed the world.
It was all right, old Dan. He taught me everything.
How to dress, act, and speak
Gatsby.
like a gentleman.
J. Gatsby. She looks well, doesn't she?
Gatsby hoped to inherit Cody's fortune.
Old sport.
But when Cody died, Gatsby was cheated of his inheritance by Cody's family. He'd been left with the ability to play the gentleman.
So I have condensed this episode into the very specific part of it, but before this, they're talking about how Gatsby comes from a really modest family. His parents were peasants, and how he met a man that was a millionaire, and that man taught him how to dress like a gentleman, how to speak and act like a gentleman. So this particular episode was important for me as an etiquette consultant to understand how a man, regardless of his origin and regardless of what kind of background he had, how he could create a new persona given his desire to change and develop. So given the Gatsby's desire to become a man that he always dreamt of becoming and being the man worthy, so to speak, of Daisy, we know that he has learned a lot of things, including how to dress well, how to speak well, and how to act well. However, there's going to be a moment later in this episode that I'll discuss where we see that sometimes emotions get over you and you forget even things that you have acquired. In this next episode, again, we see introductions. Take a look at whose name gets pronounced first and how the people in the group are being introduced to each other and what the interaction is like.
May I introduce Senator Goulin? This is Mr. Caraway.
Senator.
Mrs. Buchanan.
Jones.
Delighted.
Oh, and Mr. Buchanan, the polo player.
No, not me.
Always a pleasure to meet Buchanan.
So here we see that Gatsby is introducing Senator to a group of people. There is Nick, there's Daisy, there's Tom. And what he does is, because Senator is more important as a guest in terms of his title, maybe the respect that Gatsby has for him, he first says Senator, so introduces his name first. and then he points to each individual guest and says, Nick, Daisy, and Tom. And you see how in this interaction, when he has introduced them, what happens is Nick just says Senator, and Senator just says Garraway. And in this way, they are just acknowledging their names or the titles. So without having to engage in a long hello, pleased to meet you, just stating the title or the name in order to acknowledge the presence of the person that they've just met. This is also an acceptable form of greeting. In this episode, there are a lot of things to be discussed, so pay very specific attention to the table setup, to the manners of the guests at the table, as well as to what the waiters are doing. Pay close attention and we'll talk about it.
You know, I read somewhere.
Now let's start first with what the waiters are doing. We see that pretty much every guest has a waiter serving them. So there's almost one waiter per person, which is quite unusual for a little dinner setup like this. Then we see that they are using this metal scrap to clean the tablecloth. We see that the dessert is already being cleared off, and now they are cleaning the tablecloth, and the guests are still seated at that particular table, continuing on with their drinks and their talks. Usually, back in the days, people had a lot of different entertainment rooms. They would have their aperitifs in one room, they would have the formal gathering, formal dinner in another room, and then they would stand up and leave, and a different room or a table would be set up for coffee, drinks, and talks after the dinner. Nowadays, there's mostly one entertainment room where everything, starting from appetizers to ending with desserts, as well as the coffee and tea and drinks, is all enjoyed in one venue. So you'd see that waiters are in the presence of the guests cleaning the table. It's permissible, it's possible, given that it's that specific table where they had dinner. Now they're continuing on to have their tea and drinks. Now let's pay attention to the candles at the table. As I mentioned before, you see that in the very first episode, they were lit up because it was dark outside. Here we see that it's not dark outside, it's I think daytime or maybe late afternoon. The sun is still out, you see light, so the candles are not lit up. Then interestingly, pay attention to how guests are seated. You see that this is happening in the US. We know that this novel is taking place in Long Island. And the way that the guests are seated when they're not having anything to eat or they're not drinking is that they've placed their hands on their laps and they sit like that quietly. If this were a European movie or a European setup, you would expect the guests to have their wrists and their palms exposed to others. So they would lay their wrists at the table and their arms and palms open while talking. But because this is US, the proper way is placing your hands on your lap. There's one little moment in this episode that I had to double check or go back to watching again and again to note this. When the waiters are cleaning off the table, Nick is helping them and he's cleaning off from the tablecloth whatever is remaining on it. It looks kind and it looks nice that he's trying to help the waiters to get their job done, but this is absolutely not according to etiquette. If you're ever invited to a formal dinner, do not assist the waiters in moving the dishes, rearranging things, pushing away the dish or bringing it closer, or passing things around or helping clean up the table. If you're the guest, your job is to get seated and allow the waiter to do his job. It's not kind and it's not mindful to help the waiter in this case, because it would indicate to the waiter that he's not doing a good job and you're there to help him or guide him. It's almost like you're walking into the kitchen to help the chef to prepare the dish if it's delayed or if it's not served the right way. So always be a kind and mindful guest and just sit and wait to be served. This final episode for today's analysis is probably my most favorite episode in the entire movie, because from an etiquette standpoint of view, it shows so much about the personality, about what money is, what class is, what manners are. Take a look at it and see if you understand what I'm pointing at, and I'll talk about it in a bit.
Say a steal, a dream up. You gotta chase that. girl like this. You shut up! Shut up! You shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Gatsby looked in that moment as if he had killed a man.
My sincerest apologies.
In this episode, we know that Tom is there to get Gatsby, to get on his nerves, to get him emotional. And we know that Gatsby's weak point or spot is the fact that he comes from a peasant family, not the one that he presents, and not the background that he has, as he claims. And another point is that he was never Oxford educated as to what he has presented to the world. So we know that his background, educational and family, is something that he's very vulnerable about. And Tom knows it. And he's using this argument to get Gatsby to show his true colors, so to speak, to get emotional and to lose his temper, which he succeeds in doing. Interestingly, this whole episode just shows you that no matter how much wealth and money and, whatever you've collected on afterwards, if you weren't brought up with specific manners, if you haven't taught yourself those manners, sometimes when, life happens to you and you get under pressure, you can lose those manners. You can lose your temper and show your true colors. Throughout the movie, Gatsby was holding up, showing himself as a regal nobleman, knew exactly what to say and where to say. He was almost like this mystery man that no one understood or could feel or could comprehend. But somehow, Tom got onto his emotions by hitting that weak spot and allowing Gatsby to show his true colors and to shock everyone around them. In this moment when Gatsby loses his temper and he attacks Tom, gets completely flushed red, and he's so aggressive, and Tom says, yeah, go ahead and show your fancy manners. He's mocking him, he's making fun of him that, you never actually had those manners, you were just pretending to have them, and here you are, this is who you truly are. I always teach my students, and I say that the good news is that manners could be acquired. You don't need to have a lot of money to have good manners. It's all about teaching yourself and learning to control yourself, your emotions. Particularly when it comes to emotions, it's important to learn to control them so that you don't feed into the people that are trying to get emotions out of you. Because once the emotions fade, everything else goes back to normal. The impression that you made after storming, after yelling, after, being aggressive is the one that lingers in people's minds forever. Learn to control your emotions, and then no one will be able to control you. And to finally wrap it up, today's episode, I just want to say that this movie is about wealth, about fame, about living with a dream, about love that wasn't real or love that was one-sided, and a lot of different interesting topics are interlinked in this particular movie, and I think that's why it's so timeless, because it's so relevant to every era that people have lived and will be living. And the most important lesson that you can learn from this movie from etiquette standpoint of view is that no matter how much wealth you acquire, no matter how rich you become, make sure that you work on your manners and work on developing them from early time on. Even if you don't have the wealth, you can always acquire manners that can help you then acquire wealth. When you have good manners, you're always going to stand out, and no matter how much people try to sway you away, you'll always be your best possible version. So this movie is just a testament to exactly that. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope that you truly enjoyed watching Great Gatsby and listening at this analysis. Please do let me know in the comment section below what were some particular episodes that you personally liked and what are some movie suggestions that you have for me. And I'll be more than happy to listen to them and take them into account. Thank you, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!